February 9th, 1941. The air in Camp 303 bit like teeth. I stood in the pre-dawn darkness, my breath forming crystals that caught what little moonlight pierced the Siberian clouds. The felt boots they'd given us, thick, gray, stinking of mold, had frozen stiff during the night. My fingers, wrapped in strips of burlap, trembled as I gripped the axe handle. Not from the cold, from something else entirely. My name is Janusz Kowalski. I was 23 years old, though I felt 50. A Polish cavalry officer before the Soviets came, before my wife Marta's face became just another ghost haunting the edges of sleep, before the NKVD dragged me from our home in Pinsk and made me confess to crimes I'd never committed, before the word spy became my identity in their neat damning files. The compound stretched before me, 20 crude barracks built by prisoners' hands, surrounded by wooden watchtowers that rose like skeletal fingers against the lightning sky, 400 miles south of the Arctic Circle. Might as well have been the edge of the world. Beyond the wire, Siberian forest extended in every direction for 1,000 miles, trees so thick they swallowed sound. Cold, so deep, it could stop your heart mid-beat. I'd been here 11 months, long enough to see strong men become brittle shells, long enough to watch the winter claim 3 prisoners every week, long enough to understand that my 25-year sentence was just a polite fiction. No one survived that long here. No one was meant to. The dawn bell clanged, metal on metal. The sound cut through the morning like a wound. Around me the camp stirred. 5,000 men emerging from barracks that stank of unwashed bodies, dysentery and despair. We shuffled toward the assembly ground, a packed dirt expanse where frost had crystallized in intricate patterns. Beautiful, if you had the energy to notice beauty anymore. I didn't. Kowalski. The voice came from behind me. I turned to see. Smith, that's what we called him, though I suspected it wasn't his real name. An American, maybe 40 years old, with eyes that had seen things even Siberia couldn't match. He'd been an engineer in Moscow when Stalin's paranoia swept him up. He never talked about it. None of us talked about our pasts. What was the point? Tonight, Smith said, his voice barely above a whisper. His lips hardly moved. Khabarov says tonight. My stomach tightened. Khabarov, the actor. The one who'd been whispering about escape since the day I arrived. Most thought he was mad. Maybe he was. But 3 days ago, he'd gotten word that Colonel Ushin, the camp commandant, would be traveling to Yakutsk for supplies. Away for at least a week. Away meant a skeleton guard. Away meant a window small, closing fast, but a window nonetheless. The storm, I said, not a question. We'd all felt it coming. The pressure dropping, the stillness in the air that preceded Siberia's worst fury. Smith nodded once. It'll cover our tracks. Khabarov has supplies. Not much, but enough to get us started. Started where? I asked, though I already knew. South. Always south. Past Lake Baikal. Through Mongolia, across the Gobi, over the Himalayas, to India and British protection. 4,000 miles on foot, through some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. It was madness. Complete, suicidal madness. Better than dying here, Smith said, and walked away. I stood there as the other prisoners formed their ragged lines. A guard shouted orders in Russian, his words lost in the wind that had begun to rise. My hands shook again, but this time I knew why. Hope, that poisonous, terrible thing I'd tried so hard to bury. It was clawing its way back up my throat. The work detail assignments came down. I was on a lumber crew again, felling trees in the forest north of camp. Back-breaking, finger-numbing work that left you too exhausted to think. That was the point. Exhausted men didn't plan. Exhausted men didn't dream. Exhausted men died quietly when their time came. But I wasn't exhausted anymore. Not today. The sky had turned the color of old bruises by the time we marched through the gates. 7 of us on my crew, flanked by 2 guards who looked as miserable as we did. The forest swallowed us within minutes. Pine and birch stretched endlessly, their branches heavy with snow. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of our boots and the occasional crack of ice-laden limbs. I thought about the others. Khabarov, with his actor's intensity and his wild plans. Valka, the Russian criminal whose knife work had earned him a life sentence murder, they said, though he'd never confirmed it. Tomasz, a Polish artist whose gentle hand seemed wrong for this place. Voss, the Latvian priest who still prayed quietly each night. Zoran, the Yugoslav accountant, who somehow maintained his sense of humor despite everything. 7 of us. Maybe 8 if the girl joined. I'd heard whispers about a commandant's wife who'd been helping prisoners, slipping them extra food, turning blind eyes at crucial moments. Ushakova, they called her. A woman with her own reasons for hating what this place represented. The guards called for the first break. We dropped our axes and sat on fallen logs, our breath steaming. One of the guards lit a cigarette, the smoke sharp and acrid. My mind was elsewhere, calculating, planning. The Trans-Siberian Railway ran east-west about 60 miles south of here. We'd have to cross it. And beyond that, Lake Baikal, the deepest lake in the world, they said. A natural barrier, a checkpoint. If we could reach it, we'd know we had a chance. If the wind picked up. The guard with the cigarette looked at the sky, muttered something to his companion. They knew what was coming. Everyone knew. The storm would hit by nightfall. Maybe sooner. Back to work, one of them shouted. I picked up my axe. The handle felt different in my hands now. Not just a tool, a weapon, if it came to that. I'd promised myself I wouldn't become a killer. But promises made in Polish drawing rooms seemed like relics from another life. This was survival. Pure, brutal survival. The first snowflakes began to fall around noon. Large, wet flakes that melted on contact. Within an hour, they'd changed smaller, drier, driven by wind that had turned vicious. The guards called an early end to the work detail. Even they weren't stupid enough to be caught in a Siberian blizzard. We marched back to camp as the sky turned white. The wind howled now, a living thing that tore at our clothes and stung exposed skin. Perfect, I thought. Perfect cover. Inside the barracks, men huddled around the iron stove in the center of the room. Not much warmth, but enough to keep the worst at bay. I found my bunk, 3rd tier, middle section, and lay down fully clothed. My heart hammered against my ribs. Around me, men talked in low voices or stared at nothing. The storm outside grew louder, rattling the loose boards of the walls. Smith appeared at the edge of my bunk. He didn't speak, just nodded toward the door. Khabarov stood there, his face shadowed. He gestured subtly. Time to go. I climbed down, my movements casual. No one paid attention. Why would they? Men moved around all the time to the latrine, to beg tobacco, to find a quieter corner. I walked toward the door, counting my steps. 15 steps to freedom or death. 14, 13, the door opened. The storm hit me like a fist. Snow was so thick I couldn't see 3 feet ahead, wind that stole the air from my lungs. I pulled my cap down, tucked my hands under my arms, and followed the shape of Khabarov into the white void. This was it. No turning back now. Either we'd die out here in the next few hours, or we'd keep walking until we found freedom. 4,000 miles, 11 months. Every step is a fight. But I was done fighting to survive in this frozen hell. It was time to fight my way home. The barracks disappeared, behind us, in seconds. The world became nothing but white noise and stinging snow. I could barely make out Khabarov's back, a dark shape wavering in the blizzard. My boots crunched through fresh powder that was already ankle-deep and rising. The wind screamed in my ears, a sound like tortured metal. We weren't alone. Shapes materialized from the storm. Smith, steady as always. Valka, moving with a predator's economy. Tomasz, smaller than the rest, already struggling. Voss, his lips moving in prayer I couldn't hear. Zoran, his usual smile wiped away by the cold's assault. And one more, a woman. She wore a guard's coat, too large for her frame. Her face was partially hidden by a scarf, but I caught her eyes, fierce, determined. Ushakova. The commandant's wife who'd become something else entirely. She carried a canvas bag that bulged with supplies. No words, no time for words. Khabarov led us away from the barracks, away from the watchtowers whose searchlights couldn't penetrate this maelstrom. We moved in single file, each man keeping one hand on the shoulder of the man in front. Tomasz nearly stumbled twice in the first 100 yards. Voss caught him both times. The camp had been built in a cleared section of forest. Now we entered the trees. The storm's fury lessened slightly, blocked by dense pines, but the darkness intensified. I couldn't see my own feet. Just following the pull on my shoulder from Smith ahead, felt Zoran's grip behind me. Time lost meaning. We walked. That's all there was. Walking through snow that climbed to our knees, then our thighs. The cold wasn't just cold anymore, it was a living presence that invaded every gap in our clothes, found every exposed patch of skin, and worked its way into our bones. My face had gone numb within the first hour. I couldn't feel my toes. Couldn't tell if I still had toes. Khabarov had marked trees during his lumber details. Carved signs pointing south. Subtle enough that guards wouldn't notice. He'd been planning this for months, maybe years. I prayed he'd marked enough. One missed sign and we'd wander in circles until the cold claimed us. The hours blurred together. Walk, breathe, walk, breathe. Don't think about the distance. Don't think about how impossible this is. Just the next step. Always the next step. We stopped once, huddled together behind a massive fallen pine. Ushakova opened her bag, passed around thick slices of black bread, a handful of dried fish, newspaper strips for rolling tobacco, though no one had the energy to smoke. Water frozen in a canteen that Valka thawed against his chest. "How far?" Tomasz asked. His voice was barely a whisper, already hoarse from breathing the frozen air. 10 miles. Maybe 12, Smith said. I had no idea how he knew. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he was lying to keep us moving. Voss began to pray aloud, Latin words I half remembered from before the war, when churches had been places of peace instead of targets for Stalin's wrath. The others listened or didn't. I found myself mouthing the words along with him, not because I believed, because the rhythm was something to hold on to in the chaos. "We go," Khabarov said. He stood, swayed slightly, and caught himself. Sun comes, guards find tracks. He was right. The storm was our ally, but it wouldn't last forever. We needed to put as much distance as possible between ourselves and Camp 303 before the weather cleared, before the dogs came. We walked through the second night. The storm began to break around what I guessed was 3 in the morning. The wind died, the snow thinned to flurries. Stars appeared through gaps in the clouds, brilliant, cold, indifferent. I'd never seen so many stars. They stretched from horizon to horizon, a river of light that made me feel simultaneously insignificant and oddly hopeful. Valka took points from Khabarov. He'd grown up in these forests, or so he claimed, knew how to read the land, how to find game trails that would carry us south. His knife, wolf, he called it, hung from his belt. He touched it every few minutes like a talisman. Dawn came slowly. The sky lightened from black to gray to pale blue. The temperature plummeted. I thought the night was cold. The day proved me wrong. Siberian winter in full force, -40, -50. Cold that turned spit to ice before it hit the ground. Cold that made metal stick to bare skin. Cold that killed. But the storm had done its work. When I looked back, I saw nothing but unbroken snow. Our tracks, our presence, erased by nature's fury. If the guards came searching, they'd find no trail to follow. Not for now, anyway. We reached a frozen stream around midday. The ice was thick, opaque, with cracks running through it like veins. Smith tested it with his weight before allowing the others across. It was held, barely. I heard it groaning beneath us, felt it flex under my boots, but it held. On the far side, Ushakova stumbled, went down on one knee. I moved to help her up, but she waved me off. Pride or strength, I couldn't tell. She rose, brushed snow from her coat, and kept walking. The woman was tougher than half the men in Camp 303. Maybe tougher than all of them. I wondered what her real story was, why she'd risked everything to help 7 condemned prisoners escape. But like everything else in this group, her past was her own. We didn't ask, didn't judge, just walked. By the second sunset, exhaustion had settled into my bones like a disease. My legs moved mechanically, no longer connected to my conscious mind. I'd enter a kind of trance, one step, another step, breathing in rhythm, watching the back of Smith's head bob in front of me. Sometimes I'd snap back to awareness and realize I'd lost 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and had no memory of what I'd seen or where we'd passed. The others suffered too. Tomasz lagged constantly now. Voss stayed with him, one arm supporting the smaller man. Zoran had developed a cough deep, rattling, ominous. Ushakova's limp had worsened. Only Valka and Smith seemed unaffected, driving us forward through sheer will. We found shelter in a ravine where wind and time had carved a hollow beneath an overhanging rock. Not much protection, but enough. We huddled together, sharing body heat, ate more of the black bread, slept in shifts, 2 men always awake to watch for searchers or wolves or the hypothermia that could creep in during true rest. I drew the first watch with Khabarov. We sat at the ravine's entrance, staring out at a landscape rendered alien by moonlight and snow. Everything was blue-white, crystalline, beautiful, and deadly. "You married?" Khabarov asked. First personal question any of us had asked. I nodded. "Marta, in Pinsk. Is she waiting for you?" I didn't know how to answer that. Was she? Did she even know if I was alive? The NKVD had taken her too and used her as leverage, made her testify against me. I'd seen her face in that courtroom hollow, beaten, no longer the woman I'd married. "I hope so," I finally said. Khabarov lit one of his precious cigarettes. The ember glowed red in the darkness. "I had a wife, 2 children. Moscow." He paused. "Dead now, all dead. Stalin's purge." The words hung between us. I waited for him to continue, but he didn't. Just smoked and stared at nothing. "Why help us?" I asked. "You could have escaped alone. Better chance." He laughed, a sound without humor. "Better chance of what? Dying alone instead of with company?" He shook his head. "No. We die together or we live together. That's the only choice that matters." He was right, I realized. Whatever happened out here, whether we froze, starved, got caught, or somehow made it, we'd do it as a group. 7 strangers bound by desperation and a hunger for freedom that outweighed our fear of death. Our watch ended. Voss and Zoran took over. I crawled between Smith and Tomasz, using their warmth to thaw my frozen limbs. Sleep came instantly, dreamless and deep. When we woke, the world had changed again. The sky had cleared completely. The sun rose over endless white, turning everything to blinding brilliance. Beautiful, dangerous. Every step now would leave tracks. Every movement would be visible for miles, but we'd come too far to stop, too far to turn back. "Lake Baikal," Smith said, pointing south. 40 miles, maybe 50. 3 days if we push. 3 days. 12 more nights in the cold. 12 more chances to fail. But if we reached the lake, we'd be beyond the immediate search radius. We'd have bought ourselves time. Khabarov shouldered his pack. Then we push. And we walked. Day 4, or maybe 5. Time had become elastic, meaningless, measured only in footsteps and heartbeats. The landscape had shifted. The dense forest gave way to more open terrain, rolling hills covered in snow, occasional stands of birch like skeletal hands reaching for the sky. Exposed, vulnerable. We moved during twilight hours now, rested during the brightest part of the day when our silhouettes would betray us. Tomasz had fallen 3 times that morning. Each time he got back up. Each time, slower than before. His lips had turned blue. Not from cold, from something else. Something inside is failing. "Leave me," he whispered during our midday rest. We'd found an abandoned shepherd's hut, 3 walls still standing, the roof collapsed but offering some windbreak. I'm slowing you down. Voss gripped his shoulder. We leave no one. We should, Valka said flatly. He sat away from the group, sharpening Wolf against a whetstone he'd found somewhere. He's done. We're wasting time. The tension snapped tight. Smith moved between them before it could escalate. We vote. That's the rule. The majority decides. I looked at Tomasz. Really looked at him. His skin had gone waxy. His eyes had that glazed quality I'd seen on men in the camp right before they gave up completely. He was dying. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. We carry him, I said. Take turns, at least until Lake Baikal. Ushakova nodded. Kabarov and Voss agreed immediately. Zoran hesitated, then raised his hand. Smith made 6. Valka sheathed Wolf. You're all fools, but I'm outvoted. He stood, walked to Tomasz, and lifted him to his feet with surprising gentleness. Come on, artist. Let's see if you can make another mile. We made 5 more miles that day. Valka was right, carrying Tomasz cost us time and energy we couldn't afford. But something else was happening, something I couldn't quite name. We were becoming more than 7 desperate escapees. We were becoming something like a unit. Brothers, maybe. Or family. The mountains appeared on the horizon that evening. The first real geographic feature we'd seen beyond endless trees and snow. Smith consulted a crude map he'd been carrying, drawn from memory of his Moscow engineering days. Barguzin Range, he said, follows the eastern shore of Lake Baikal. We're close. Close meant another 3 days. 3 days of reduced rations because Ushakova's supplies were nearly gone. 3 days of temperatures that dropped so low my eyebrows frosted. 3 days of putting one foot in front of the other because stopping meant death. We survived by hunting. Valka proved his worth, using wolf and primitive snares to catch small game rabbits, once a fox, even a scrawny grouse that we roasted over a fire so small it gave more comfort than heat. We ate everything. Fur, organs, bones cracked for marrow. Nothing wasted. Couldn't afford waste. Water came from melted snow heated in a tin can Zoran had fashioned from debris. We passed it around, each person taking a few swallows of lukewarm liquid that tasted of metal and wood smoke. Not enough to quench thirst, but enough to survive. I thought about food constantly during those days. Real food. Marta's pierogi, thick with potato and cheese. Bread fresh from the oven. Butter melting into its crust. Roasted chicken, the skin crispy and rich. Beer, cold and bitter. My mouth watered at the memories. My stomach was cramped with hunger that bordered on pain. The others felt it too. Zoran talked about Belgrade cafes. Voss described his mother's holiday meals in elaborate detail. Even Valka admitted to missing his grandmother's borscht, though he said it with a shrug, as if the admission cost him something. Only Ushakova remained silent about her past. She walked with grim determination, her limp worsening daily but her pace never faltering. Sometimes I'd catch her staring south with an expression I couldn't read. Loss, hope, revenge, all 3 maybe. On day 7 I'd started keeping count by carving notches into a stick I carried. We crested a ridge, and there it was, Lake Baikal. It stretched before us like a white desert, perfectly flat, perfectly frozen, extending to a horizon so distant it might have been the edge of the world. The far shore was invisible, lost in haze. The ice gleamed under the afternoon sun, blue-white and ancient. The deepest lake on earth, they said. A mile deep in places. Now frozen solid enough to walk across. Beautiful, Voss whispered. Deadly, Smith corrected. No cover out there, no shelter, if a storm catches us halfway. He didn't finish. I didn't need to. Kabarov studied the ice. We are going tonight. The moon is nearly full. Good light. We cross in one push. 10, maybe 12 hours. Tomasz won't make it, I said quietly. Everyone looked at the artist. He sat on a rock, his breathing labored, his skin gray. He'd eaten almost nothing in 2 days, could barely walk without support. 12 hours on that ice would kill him. Tomasz met our eyes. He smiled a real smile, the first I'd seen from him since the escape. I made it this far. That's enough. No, Voss said. No, I'll slow you down, get you caught, or killed. Tomasz's voice was firm, clearer than it had been in days. Give me a knife. Some food. I'll find shelter. Wait for spring. Maybe I'll make it, maybe I won't. But you go. All of you. Finish this. We argued for an hour. Voss refused to leave, called it murder. Khabarov said it was mercy. Valka shrugged. He'd suggested leaving Tomasz days ago. Smith remained quiet, his face unreadable. Zoran coughed and couldn't stop. In the end, we voted again, 4-3. We'd leave Tomasz behind. We gave him half our remaining food. Valka's knife, the smaller one, he'd kept hidden. Flint for starting fires. We helped him down to a sheltered hollow where the wind wouldn't reach, and built him a crude lean-to from pine branches. He'd freeze eventually, or starve, but he'd have a chance. A small one. Tell them I made it, Tomasz said as we prepared to leave. When you reach India, tell them I made it to the lake. Tell them I saw how beautiful it was. We'll tell them, I promised. We left him there as the sun set. None of us looked back. Couldn't afford to. Couldn't afford the doubt or guilt that would come with looking back. The ice was worse than I'd imagined. The surface looked smooth from the ridge, but up close, it was a maze of pressure ridges, cracks, and depressions filled with wind-packed snow. We moved in a tight group, testing each step, listening for the groan of ice that might mean danger. The cold was absolute. No trees to block the wind that came screaming across that open expanse. It cut through our clothes, our skin, straight to the center of us. My face went numb within an hour. I couldn't feel my hands or feet. I had to look down constantly to make sure my legs were still moving. Halfway across, Zoran collapsed, just dropped like a puppet with cut strings. We got him up, but he couldn't support his own weight. His cough had turned bloody. We took turns carrying him, 2 men at a time, while the others broke trail through the drifted snow. The moon rose, full and brilliant, casting shadows on the ice that seemed to move with predatory intent. I began to hallucinate. Saw Marta walking beside me, her dress flowing despite the wind. She smiled, reached for my hand, dissolved into snowflakes. Saw guards coming across the ice, searchlights sweeping. Blinked, and they were just moonlight on ice. Smith grabbed my shoulder. "Stay with us, Kowalski." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I could. The cold was inside me now, in my blood, my thoughts, making everything slow and distant. But I kept walking. We all kept walking. Dawn found us at the western shore. We crawled up the rocky beach and collapsed in a stand of pines. Too exhausted to feel relief, too numb to feel anything. We'd crossed Lake Baikal. We'd lost Tomasz, maybe lost Zoran too from the sound of his breathing. But we'd done the impossible. 600 miles from Camp 303, 3,400 miles to go. Mongolia swallowed us whole. The forests of Siberia gave way to steppe-vast grasslands covered in snow that would turn to dust come summer. Then the grass disappeared entirely, replaced by rock and sand and wind that never stopped. We'd been walking for 3 months. Spring was coming to the north, but here, approaching the Gobi Desert, the seasons seemed reversed. The nights remained bitter, but the days had begun to bake. Temperature swings of 60 degrees or more. Our bodies couldn't adapt. Zoran died 2 weeks after Lake Baikal. The bloody cough turned to pneumonia, then to something worse. He died in his sleep, a small mercy. We buried him in a shallow grave under a stand of stunted trees. Voss said prayers. Valka marked the spot with a cairn of stones that would last exactly as long as the next windstorm. 5 now. Smith, Valka, Khabarov, Voss, and me. Ushakova had left us at a Mongolian village, where her Russian wouldn't draw attention. She'd given us what remained of the supplies, gripped each of our hands, and walked away without looking back. I wondered if she'd made it to wherever she'd been running to. I hoped she had. I owed her that much. The Mongolian nomads watched us pass but didn't interfere. We were ghosts to them, hollow-eyed scarecrows moving through their land with no explanation and no destination they could understand. Sometimes they left food at the edge of their camps, dried meat, hard cheese, mare's milk in leather pouches. We took it gratefully, left what few items we could spare in return. The Gobi began without warning. One day we were on the steppe, the next we were surrounded by sand. Not the sandy beaches of picture books, this was different. Harder, darker, lifeless, in a way that made Siberia seem abundant. Water became everything. We found it in rare springs, in the condensation on rocks before dawn, once in an ancient cistern that some long-dead traveler had built. We rationed drops, fought the temptation to drink deep, and damn the consequences. The sun was merciless. It burned my skin raw, peeled it, burned it again. My lips cracked and bled. My eyes felt like sandpaper. The glare off the sand brought tears that evaporated before they could fall. "We're going to die here," Voss said one night. Not despair, just a statement of fact. "Maybe," Smith acknowledged, "but not yet. Not today." It became our mantra, not yet, not today. Tomorrow could bring death, but we'd deal with tomorrow when it comes. On a day I'd marked as late April or early May, we found her. A figure stumbling through the dunes, small, moving erratically. We approached carefully, Valka with wolf drawn, the rest of us ready to run if needed. As we got closer, I saw it was a girl. Teenage, maybe 17 or 18. Her clothes were rags, her feet were bare, swollen, and bloody. She was alone. She collapsed before we reached her. We gave her water, just a little, Smith warned. Too much would make her sick. She drank and coughed and looked at us with eyes that had seen too much. "Irena," she said in Polish. "My name is Irena." Her story came out in fragments over the next few days. Polish, like me and Voss. Her parents had been communists, true believers in Stalin's vision. The Soviets killed them anyway. Sent Irena to a collective farm near the border. The foreman there tried to force himself on her. She'd run. Been running ever since. Months, maybe. She'd lost count. We couldn't leave her. Wouldn't leave her. She became the 6th member of our group, our impossible family. But she was dying. I noticed at first the smell. Sweet, rotten, coming from her left foot. Voss checked and found what we'd feared. Gangrene. The infection had turned her toes black, spreading up her ankle. "We cut it off. She dies from shock or infection," Smith said. "We don't cut it off. It'll kill her in days." "Then we carry her," I said, "like Tomasz." "For 3,000 miles? For 3,000 miles?" Valka shook his head. "Through the rest of the desert and the Himalayas, she'll die anyway. Better to what?" I cut him off. "Leave her like we left Tomasz?" "Yes," Valka said simply. "That's exactly what I'm saying. We didn't vote this time. Smith made the decision. We'd carry her as long as we could. If she died, she died. But we wouldn't leave another person behind. Not if we had a choice." Irena lasted 3 more weeks. We made a stretcher from whatever materials we could find, and took turns carrying her. She grew weaker daily. The fever took her in and out of consciousness. Sometimes she'd talk, rambling stories about Warsaw before the war, about her parents, about a boy she'd loved who'd been killed in the invasion. Sometimes she'd scream, lost in nightmares we couldn't wake her from. She died on a morning when the sky was impossibly blue, just closed her eyes between one breath and the next, and didn't open them again. She was smiling. I hoped that meant she'd found peace. I hoped it meant something. We buried her in the sand, marked the spot with rocks like we'd done for Zoran. Voss said prayers, though I could tell his faith was wavering. How much death could one man witness and still believe in a benevolent God? 5 again. The number we'd been for most of this journey. It felt right somehow. Destiny or mathematics? I couldn't say. The Gobi finally released us in late June. We crossed into Tibet, and the desert gave way to grassland, then foothills, then the mountains themselves, the Himalayas, the roof of the world. Looking up at those peaks, white against blue, I felt something like awe. How were we supposed to cross that? We were half dead, starving, our clothes in tatters. But we'd come so far, survived so much. What was one more impossible thing? India's on the other side, Smith said. Freedom's on the other side. We started climbing. The altitude was its own kind of hell. At 12,000 feet, my head began to pound. At 15,000, I struggled to catch my breath with every step. At 18,000, I was moving through mud, each movement requiring conscious thought and monumental effort. The cold returned. Not Siberian cold, this was higher, thinner, somehow worse. It lived in my chest, made every breath an exercise in pain. Frostbite took 2 of Voss's fingers. He never complained, just wrapped them in strips torn from his shirt and kept moving. We followed valleys when we could, avoided the highest peaks because our bodies couldn't survive that altitude. The landscape was alien rocks in shades of red and brown and purple, snow that seemed more blue than white, silence so complete it pressed against my eardrums. Food was memory. We found almost nothing at this height. A nest of birds' eggs once we ate them raw, barely pausing to crack the shells. A marmot that Valka killed with wolf. Its meat tough and stringy but protein nonetheless. Mostly we survived on will. I'd lost track of the days, lost track of how long we'd been walking. The stick with notched marks had been abandoned somewhere in the Gobi. It didn't matter. Time was measured differently now. Before the mountains, in the mountains, after the mountains if there was an after. We lost Khabarov on a ridge I couldn't name. He'd been the strongest of us for so long, driving us forward with his actor's intensity and iron will. But even iron bends under enough pressure. He slipped on ice. A simple mistake, foot placement a few inches wrong, weight shifted at the wrong moment. He went over the edge before any of us could react. We heard him hit something far below. Then nothing. We couldn't retrieve his body. The drop was sheer, hundreds of feet to rocks we couldn't see. We stood at the edge, staring down into the void that had swallowed our companion. He got us this far, Smith said. Without him, we'd all be dead in Camp 303. It was true. Khabarov had been the architect of our escape. His planning, his conviction, his refusal to accept death, they'd carried us through the worst of it. 4 now. Smith, Valka, Voss, and me. We descended from that ridge without speaking, nothing left to say. The final pass, I learned later it was called Jelapla, nearly killed us all. 20,000 feet of altitude, winds that could knock a man down, cold that made even breathing dangerous. We moved in a kind of trance, one step at a time, focused on nothing beyond the next footfall. I don't remember much of that crossing. I remember being down to 3. Voss had collapsed, and we'd pulled him up. Remember thinking I was about to die and feeling oddly okay with it. Remember seeing Valka ahead of me, his frame skeletal now, wolf still hanging from his belt. Then the descent. Real descent. Down into warmth and green and air thick enough to actually breathe. Into forests that smelled alive. Into sounds, birds, insects, running water, into life. We stumbled into the British military post near Darjeeling in late January 1942, 11 months since our escape. 4,000 miles on foot through conditions that should have killed us all. The guards approached with rifles raised. We must have looked like walking, corpses emaciated, filthy, our clothes in rags, our eyes hollow with everything we'd seen. One of them called for a medical officer. Another brought water, told us to drink slowly. "Who are you?" the commanding officer asked. British accent, Sandhurst educated, clearly baffled by our appearance. "Escaped prisoners," Smith said. His voice was raspy from disuse. "Soviet Gulag. Camp 303 in Yakutsk." The officer stared at us, looked at the mountains we'd just descended. I looked back at us. That's not possible. But it was. We were proof. 4 survivors out of 7 who'd started. 7 who'd had the courage or madness or desperation to believe in the impossible. They took us to a hospital, fed us carefully, our stomachs had shrunk and couldn't handle much, treated our frostbite, our infections, our malnourishment, asked us questions we could barely answer, our minds still half in survival mode, unable to fully process that we'd made it. I thought about the others during those first nights in clean beds under solid roofs. Tomasz at Lake Baikal, Zoran in Mongolia, Irena in the Gobi, Khabarov on that unnamed ridge. They'd died so we could live. Their miles, their suffering, their sacrifice. It was woven into every step we'd taken afterward. Smith re-enlisted with the Polish forces in exile. Valka disappeared. I heard rumors he joined the British intelligence services, his particular skills useful in the war effort. Voss became a chaplain, ministering to Polish refugees scattered across India. I eventually made my way to Britain, spent the rest of the war in various support roles, always hoping for word about Marta. Never got it. But we'd done it. We'd walked out of hell. 4,000 miles on foot through some of the most unforgiving terrain on earth. We'd proven that freedom was worth any cost, any suffering, any sacrifice, and on nights when I can't sleep, when the memories come flooding back, I remember Khabarov's words from that first watch in the ravine. We die together or we live together. That's the only choice that matters. We chose to live. Against all odds, against all reason, we chose to live. And we walked.